Guys, of course, whenever you have doubts or whatever, here I am. So I'm gonna go on with this, and then probably we will also watch a little video, but at the beginning of the next workshop session on Monday. I will also... Federica, dimmi tu quando stai iniziando a registrare.
Già iniziato.
Ok. So I will be talking about food and the city, most of all based on the reflection and the research carried out by an brilliant English scholar who is Caroline Steele. I already mentioned her a couple of times because she published a couple of books on this issue, on this topic. One in 2009 that was titled Hungry City, How Food Shapes Our Lives. And a kind of more optimistic one, which is much more recent, that is titled Citopia, How We Change the World Through Food, basically. So it was a kind of rereading of what she already said and stated in the first book, but through a more optimistic and a more proactive approach. Anyways, before proceeding to the main topic, which is the relationship between the actual shape of the city and the food, I would like, first of all, to make some introductory remarks on, we will say, like, the issue of urban complexity in a broader sense. I already mentioned a couple of times, I think, the position, for example, taken by Jane Jacobs on urban complexity in the 1960s. I think it's a very effective way to set the scene for any consideration that has to do with food system and the city. So as we already mentioned in the previous classes, many of the problems of the modern city start with the early 20th century, and most of all with this idea that was crucial for the modern architects and urban planners, such as Le Corbusier, of rationalization, that is, of zoning, that is dividing the city into different zones according to some principles, which are, for example, the division of the activities, of the productive activities, and the residential infrastructure. So you have here the Villeradiers. There was a proposal put forward by Le Corbusier in the 1930s, and that is a kind of a very strong and very well-established paradigm of modern city planning. So you have these residential blocks that are actually occupying certain definite spaces within the city, very, very much separated from the productive areas and from the system of infrastructure that connects the city in itself. So the basic idea is rationalization. That is the idea of dividing the city into different compartments. And the idea, of course, that is the crucial idea of modern city planning, of zoning. So dividing the city into different zones. This paradigm, as we already mentioned, and as you probably already know, was heavily criticized by Jane Jacobs in the 1961 with this very seminal book that was titled The Death and Life of Great American Cities. An interesting thing to note is that Jane Jacobs was not an urban planner. She was a journalist. She was a writer, a New Yorker writer. So she took a stance, a very radical stance against modern city planning that according to her was responsible for many of the shortcomings of contemporary cities. And along the same lines, also Christopher Alexander, who was actually a philosopher, he published this very influential essay, much shorter essay than Jacob's book. And this essay was called "A City is Not a Tree." That was very much consistent with the perspective adopted by Jane Jacobs. What does it mean that the city is not a tree, and what is at the center, at the core of both Alexander's and Jacob's critiques? Probably we already went through this quote by Jane Jacobs who wrote the pseudoscience of planning seems almost neurotic in its determination to imitate empiric failure and ignore empiric success. This is a first radical and explicit stance against the expertise of modern town planners, who, based on scientific analysis, feel this kind of right to establish which model of the city is more rational. And she said, well, we should learn from the city itself which model is more effective, which urban model is more effective, is more lively, right? And she talks about, in this book, she makes a case, a very famous case, for this idea, almost like an idea of promiscuous idea of urban collective space, in which she states, well, the more functions are overlapped within the urban space, the better it is. I'm going to read a couple of fragments from the book, because I think they're very essential to understand this issue. So she writes, first of all, under the seeming disorder of the old city, wherever the old city is working successfully, is a marvelous order for maintaining the safety of the streets and the freedom of the city. So what is apparently looks at disorder is in fact a specific form of order. It is a complex order, though. It's not a simple order, but it's complex. He has many folds. Its essence is intricacy of sidewalk use, which means that the use of the sidewalk are basically complex in the sense that they are overlapped, bringing with it a constant succession of eyes. So there are many eyes within the sidewalk, many eyes of people who is actually performing different functions within the city. So this order is all composed of movement and change. And although it is life, not art, we may fancifully call it the art form of the city, and liken it to the dance, not to a simple-minded precision dance with everyone kicking up at the same time. It's not a choreography, twirling in unison, bowing off en masse, but to an intricate ballet in which the individual dancers and ensembles have distinctive parts which miraculously reinforce each other and compose a whole. So, first of all, she's introducing a form of metaphor, a kind of metaphor that she became famous for. There was this kind of street ballet. The ballet, which is not something that is completely ordered in a totalizing manner, but it's something that emerges out of these different uses that kind of intermingle with each other, that are kind of overlapped. The ballet of the good city sidewalk never repeats itself from place to place. That's why it's not arranged in a totalized manner and in a manner that is once and for all, but it's kind of adapted to the contingency of every urban context. And so it never repeats itself from place to place, and in any one's place is always replete with new improvisations. So this idea that the ballet is always open to be reperformed, reinterpreted in the specific place in which it's set. This is much bigger, as you see. This is much larger as a quote, but I think it's very interesting because this was the actual fragment that became famous as the Hudson Street Ballet. So she writes because she actually grew up in Hudson Street in New York, in Manhattan, and so she writes, the stretch of Hudson Street where I live is each day the scene of an intricate sidewalk ballet. I make my own first entrance into it a little after 8 when I put out my garbage can. Surely a prosaic occupation. I enjoy my part, my little clan, as the junior draws of the junior high school students walk by the center of the stage, dropping candy wrapper. How do they eat so much candy so early in the morning? While I sweep up the wrappers and I watch the other rituals of the morning. So focus on this word, like keep an eye on this word, the ritual, right? Mr. Halpert unlocking the laundry's handcar from his mooring to a cellar door. Joe Cornacchia's son-in-law's taking out the empty crates from the delicatessen. The barber bringing out his sidewalk folding chair. Mr. Goldstein arranging the coils of wire which proclaim the hardware store is open. The wife of the tenement superintendent depositing her chunky 3-year-old with a toy mandolin on the stoop, the vantage point from which he's learning English. His mother cannot speak. So it's very poetic in the way. It's kind of is more literature than we will say urban theory. Right? Now the primary children heading from St. Luke's dribble through the south. The children from St. Veronica's Cross heading to the west, and the children from PS 41 heading toward the east. 2 new entrances are made from the wings. Well-dressed and even elegant women and men with briefcases emerge from doorways and side streets. So it's kind of theatrical the way it unfolds, you see? Most of these are heading for the bus and subways, but some hover on the curbs, stopping taxis which have miraculously appeared at the right moment. For the taxis are part of a wider morning ritual once again. Having dropped passengers from Midtown in the downtown financial district, they are now bringing downtowners up to Midtown. Simultaneously, numbers of women in house dresses have emerged as they crisscross with one another. They pose for quick conversation that some will loiter or join indignation. So it is time for me to hurry to work too. And I exchange my ritual farewell with Mr. Lofaro, the short, thick-bodied, white-aproned fruit man who stands outside his doorway a little up the street, his arms folded, his feet planted, looking solid as the earth itself. We nod. We each glance quickly up and down the street, then look back at each other and smile. We have done this many mornings for more than 10 years, and we both know what it means, that all is well. So all is running smooth. So you see that it's very poetic and at the same time very theatrical, the image that Jane Jacobs creates. But it's a very good description of how a city works insofar as it includes different activities taking place at the same moment and in the same place. And so, for example, I remember when I was in Hanoi, in Vietnam, for example, seeing this kind of images of urban richness of, for example, a barber cutting hair or bird at people on the street while the other ones were just walking by or passing by the scooter or opening a shop or opening a restaurant. So this kind of what I refer to as urban promiscuity that probably most of you are used to also in India and Iran, basically. But they are not so common in the Western world, like such as Europe or the US. Of course, you can find it in Naples, this kind of urban promiscuity that stands for urban richness in terms of livelihood. And this idea that the more overlapped the function of our city are, the better it is also at the basis of what Christopher Alexander writes in this famous article that is "The City is Not a Tree" in 1965. So, for example, he says, the modern cities normally are arranged like a tree, in which you have like a clear separation between among the different branches. While the city, the traditional city, we will say, or the city, pre-modern city, works more like this other infrastructural model, which is the semi-lattice, which is of course a model, an organizational model in which different circles, as you see, overlap with each other. For example, he compares Cambridge in the UK to Chandigarh in India, and basically Chandigarh in India was actually built upon a project by Le Corbusier. So it was a project, a modern project that arranged the whole city according to this idea of clear separation between functions. So you see, for example, in one case, in the case on the left, on the right, we have a tree, right, in which any branch is separated, and there's a clear hierarchy between different levels of organization, of urban organization. While in Cambridge, on the left side, you will see that all these activities, all these different functions, houses, shops, bars, cafes, subways, bus, dorms, etc., are kind of differently overlapping with each other in different parts of the city, right? This is actually not Cambridge in the UK, I was wrong. It's Cambridge in the US, it's Cambridge, Massachusetts. And of course, in all this, we should also take into account what I always said, that we should start looking at the city as an organism that is composed both by material and social and processual components. So that's why I write, in the traditional, well-established perspective of architecture and urbanism, the city is mainly seen as a material artifact. The challenge is to start looking at it as a network of processes and services, in which also the material aspects play a decisive role. So this is what we always say from the very beginning of this course, of this workshop, that architects and town planners are used to focusing on the tangible aspects of the city, while they often overlook, or they often forget about all the social processes that take place within the city, and that actually make up the most considerable part of the urban livelihood, as we just seen with Jane Jacobs. Here there are some images that I used that are from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, that is actually based in Rome. And they, for example, they've been working for many years now on this idea of implementing sustainable food system within the cities. So they try to make some schemes in which they kind of try to show how basically all the things are interconnected. So when you talk about sustainable food systems within the city, you have social, also political benefits, by the way. You have also environmental and natural benefits, and also you have some kind of economic benefits in terms of a more equitable income distribution between people, right? If you switch from a food regime, what we will call food regime, in which the most of the food production is in the hands of some big corporation, to a model based on what we say food sovereignty, in which people who actually work the land, who actually control, for example, who actually own familiar shops, for example, family-run shops, are actually in control of the entire food system. This is also about this. As you see here, all these schemes or these frameworks are just dominated and very much characterized by the use of a circular model, because everything is based on circularity. So you have a perfect circularity between among the various steps of production, processing, distribution, and consumption. And so you have all the benefits, social benefits, ecological benefits, so natural benefits, and also economical benefits that are connected to this kind of model. Of course, I will just leave the PowerPoint, as I always do, at the end of my class on Teams. This is actually the first book that Caroline Steele published in 2009. As I said, it's titled Hungry City. And it's a very interesting insight and a very exhaustive insight into the very powerful links between food and the shape of the city itself. So how the actual shape of the city is actually influenced by food supply. And she's an historian, and I think it's from an historical point of view, it's very fascinating, because she studied, for example, she carried out a considerable part of her PhD research in Rome, and she studied, for example, the way ancient Rome was working in terms of food supply, and she found some enlightening relationship between the shape of the city and the size of the city of Rome in the ancient times, and the food supply that was coming by sea, for example. So what is the main, if there's a main core of Caroline Steele's argument, what it is? She starts from this very famous painting. It's a fresco that is in Siena. It was made by Ambrogio Lorenzetti we will see in the late Middle Age. Actually, this copy of this fresco is to be found in one of the classrooms in Forno Vecchio here in Naples, at the Department of Architecture. So basically, this image is very well known and very influential, because what Lorenzetti does is, like, metaphorically depict an urban scene in which you see a little town that is connected to the surroundings, in which basically, I know that you cannot see it very well in this image. I wasn't able to find a better one, but you can also go and browse on the internet. The link between the city, the small city, and the surroundings and the natural surroundings is very strong. So the city is basically supplying itself. It's almost self-sufficient in terms of food supply, and this basically amounts for the good government. So it's a well-governed city, it's a well-governed little town. It's a town in which the relationship between the city itself and the surroundings are very tight and very strict. And in which the countryside itself is the part of the space that provides food to the city. So the more the city is able to rely on its immediate surroundings, the better it is, also in terms of government, in terms of the way the city itself runs politically. It's also true, though, that some cities, also in the ancient times, grew much bigger than this kind of average size of small cities. And this was the special case, for example, for Rome, that Caroline Steele studied. And so, for example, she studied where the majority of food items were coming from in the ancient Rome. And you see that there's a strong majority of supply routes that go by sea, because by sea it's much more cost effective. The transportation of foods is much more cost effective by sea than by land. So majority of food supply was coming by sea, while, for example, silk will come from the land, both in Rome, in the Roman Empire, also before that in Greece, in the ancient Greece. So you have a kind of general framework of the ancient Rome's food supply here. But she said, well, you know, this is, I mean, the relationship between the shape of the city and the food supply was evident also in much more modern, we will say, cases, such as, for example, the 17th century London. And we can see it, she said, from the very, we can tell it from the very name that some streets or some squares still have in London. For example, you have, as you see here, the grain markets, the markets where you will find grain and bread, that are still, that still manifestly have this kind of root etymologically, or also even the name itself, bread streets or Cheapside or Cornhill, with the hill where you can find corn. So, and these are both in the inside the city and on the river of Thames, as you see. Well, the same thing might be said about the fish markets. As you say, the boats will stop at Billingsgate or Queenhithe, and then there's a street called Fish Street. There's a Friday Street in which there was another fish market back at that time, and also even more evidently the meat markets. And so you just probably start seeing something that is very interesting. While, for example, in the previous images, if I go back, you will see that the supply of corn and the supply of grain and the supply of fish will come obviously by the river. You see that the supply of meat will come by the countryside. And so you have this parts of the city that are called Leadenhall, Poultry, Newgate, Smithfield, in which you have the meat markets or the meat district of the 17th century. And of course, you have to bear in mind that the train, where the railway had not been invented yet. So this cows or this livestock had to walk to the center of the city to get slaughtered in one of the main squares, as you see here. So the city couldn't grow much bigger because well, the cows couldn't go more far than probably like 30 kilometers, 30 miles. So it was impossible for a city like London in the 17th century to grow bigger than a certain size because of this. So because of a material aspect, there was the fact that the cows were only able to walk a certain range of distance, right? But with the invention of the railway, everything changes because, of course, the cows and the livestock can be transported by railway. And so the distance that you can cover is much bigger. When the Great Western Railway was invented in the 1840s, there was a huge drive toward the enlargement of the fact that the cities grows bigger, right? So we always talk. It's fascinating because we always talk about the Industrial Revolution, So we always have this idea that the city grew bigger because of the Industrial Revolution. But actually, the cities could grow bigger because of the railway, because the railways made sure that the food supply was still coming to the city, no matter how big they were. Because a city that is too big cannot just rely on its immediate surroundings, because its immediate surroundings are not enough to, how do I say, to feed off the whole population. And so you have this, right? This is very, very, very iconic in the way that Karen still shows it, right? So you have a certain amount of the city, a certain size of the city back in 1840 that grows much bigger, almost a double of the size at the beginning of the 20th century. And in 1929, it was almost like 3 times the initial size. So in less than a century, you have like this immense growth of the urban areas that are made possible. This immense growth is made possible by the invention of the railway and the effects on the urban food supply. And so in this context, for example, most of all in the beginning of the 20th century, you got people such as Elizabeth Howard, that was very famous in England, and not only in England, because it was the inventor of the model of the garden cities, in which he devised a new kind of model for arranging the relationship between the cities and the surroundings. So no huge metropolis such as London already was, but a very different model in which there was a kind of spread countryside in which central cities were surrounded by other kind of satellite cities. And these cities were not, couldn't grow bigger than a certain size, which of course was a way for Howard to save the relationship between the size of the city and the size of the countryside that was supplying it in terms of food. You understand? But now we have this, something very different, right? From the idea of the garden cities, or from the idea of Ambrogio Lorenzetti's Allegoria del Buon Governo, right? The small town in which the contacts and the relationship within the surroundings is contained within a certain reasonable scale, right? You have this nowadays. You have like these monsters, these urban monsters that are not even metropolis. They are more cosmopolis, basically, that are immensely big. You know that the population of Tokyo, for example, also has reached already like 32 million inhabitants. I think this is Shanghai or Hong Kong, I don't know, but we are talking most of all about cities in Southeast Asia, in Asia, in the Far East, and also Latin America. But also, of course, you have Mumbai or Delhi in India, for example. So you have like this immense urban organism that are very hard to supply by their surroundings. They are actually impossible to supply only relying upon their surroundings. It's just impossible. They exist because of the existence of a global food chain, which is what we will be talking about. We are talking about today. So these cities are not even possible without the global food system and the global food regimes that sustain them. There's a very interesting model that was a very interesting research and model carried out by this, I think it's a Dutch scholar, Grieving, or from Belgium, I don't remember. But Grieving devised this kind of visualization that is very effective for me to understand some of the paradoxes, not even the shortcomings, but the paradoxes of the contemporary food system. So this kind of bottleneck, it's actually, it's almost like a sand clock, right? Una clessiva in Italian, that you see on the left part of the screen. Because he says, well, you know what? It's paradoxical, but look only at the extremes of this list, right? You have the farmer and producers, and then you have the consumers. Okay, so you have a certain amount, for example, in Netherlands, Germany, France, UK, Austria, and Belgium. In these countries that are dominated already by the big agricultural system, the big ags, you have these two actors. From on one side, you have the farmers and the producer, that in this case are 3 million and 200,000, right? And then you have 160 million consumers, okay? Well, he says it's paradoxical, but the only way that these producers and these consumers can get in touch with each other is through 110 buying desks. So it's paradoxical, but it's actually very enlightening, this fact. You understand? That you have a huge amount of producers, you have a much huger amount of consumers, but the only place in which these two lines cross each other is within a supermarket, and you have 110 buying desks. So you understand how many possible connections would there be between producers and consumer that are able to skip the big distribution, just take place somewhere else. It's not in a big supermarket such as Carrefour or whatever, but in a local market, or in a I don't know, in a community garden, for example. So you have like many options that a certain system based on the big agriculture and huge, not even big corporation tend to erase. You understand? And on the other hand, you have the idea of distributed food system, which of course are based on the same idea that we already mentioned by Christopher Alexander. Overlapping system in which you have, for example, a vertical farm, a community-run garden, a guerrilla gardening initiative, and you have like a consumers group that get in touch with people that are working in the community garden. So you have like different kinds of how do I say, relationship between production and supply and consumption that are not based only on this kind of big suppliers. And of course, this is also has to do with what we already said, with resilience. Because if you had only the only place in which the relationship between production and consumption takes place is the supermarket, well, when the supermarket gets closed, gets shut off because of whatever reason, well, you don't have the connection anymore. So you don't have the way to supply these people. And this is something that happens actually, also happened during the pandemic, in which some supermarkets, big supermarkets, were forced to close, even for a period. Well, there were people that were left without food for a certain amount of time. So if you have not only the supermarket, but also the family-run shop, or the local market, or the urban garden, you have like 3 or 4 options, and this multiplies the resilience that a certain system has. So the option that you have to buy food. But the agribusiness monopoly is based on this. So the agribusiness monopoly is based on a bunch of corporations that, of course, are based on a simple fact, which is the bigger, the better, right? So you have, I wrote down, you have the global scale of food suppliers. So those who really control the contemporary food chains. There are both producers, such as, for example, Nestlé, a case among any other, above any other, Kraft, for example. But then you also have the retailers, so the corporations that are basically dealing with distribution and dealing with transportation and distribution, such as, for example, Tesco in the UK, or Walmart also in the UK. Caroline Steele, who is British, she always says that the UK case is one of the worst example of a very thriving urban food system that was actually destroyed by the appearance of this mega big corporation that basically wreaked havoc within the traditional city. Also bringing about consequences that we will see. There are not only consequences on the food system itself, there are consequences on, and not only on the health of people, but also on the very shape of our urban environments, as we will see. And of course, I mean, the system that is the contemporary agribusiness, the food regime, the contemporary food regime is based on this idea of a very rationalized chain in which you have a certain industrialized farm, then this these food items, whatever they may be, vegetables or animals, go through a manufacturing process within a factory, and then they get sold on a market, and then they go on a kitchen, then they go on the table, and then they end up in waste. So you have a very rationalized model that is not how do I say, is not open to different kind of connection among these different moments of the food supply chain. We will see that something very different can happen in another system. As I was saying before, these are the food deserts. So the food deserts are the areas of a certain metropolis, such as, for example, New York City in this case, that are completely, how do I say, completely devoid of any supermarket, because of course they are low-income areas and they don't have the right amount of supermarket to feed the whole population. So, for example, you see, of course, in the rich parts of Manhattan, you have a very low supermarket need index, while, for example, in Brooklyn or in the Bronx or Harlem in the upper side of Manhattan, you have a very red index, because of course they are like the poorest part of the city. So there's a kind of direct causation link between the level of income of a certain part of the city and the amount of supermarkets that are available in that part of the city. And so, speaking of the consequences that you have on the urban environment itself, on the everyday environment itself, well, you know that in the majority of the industrialized cities, you have normally the outskirts of the city, the more peripheral areas that are just dotted with this huge supermarkets such as Tesco and Walmart in the UK. But you have, as I say, we have Carrefour or Lidl in Italy, and many others, of course. In Spain, they have Mercadona and Corte Inglés, for example, big corporation, and Carrefour is a very French company, and it's basically spread all over. So you have like this, the urban environment itself that changes because it has to host this big, huge buildings in which you will find, of course, anything, to the expense of a more distributed system, which was the traditional one we will see. See right after. Not only the big supermarkets like mega market, as we say, and we've just seen, but also the idea and the model of the convenience stores. The convenience stores are smaller version of the big supermarkets, and are of course also owned by the same companies. Family Mart is a part of Walmart. Metro is the convenience store owned by Tesco, if I remember well. And so they are like small shops. They look like small shops, but they are not. They are in competition, in direct competition with the family-run food shops. But of course, the prices are much more affordable because they have the scale of production that allows them to reduce the price of food. Okay, and so, for example, Karen Steele talks about this what she calls the supermarket tsunami in the UK that killed family-run shops and devastated town centers in the 80s and in the 90s in the United Kingdom. So all the family-run shops, all the traditional markets were slowly, well, not even slowly, but kind of at a certain pace were replaced by these convenience stores. So everything in the hands of a bunch of enterprises that are always the same. And so Banksy, that you can, of course, it's a street artist that you already know. He made this very ironic metaphor of Tesco as a petrol bomb. It's actually Tesco that is setting the old city on fire because it's destroying the traditional city. And not only the traditional city, but also the traditional social relations that take place in a traditional city. And we've just seen with Jane Jacobs. Well, they are all destroyed by these huge companies that monopolize the market and changed completely the shape of the urban environment. But also, it's not only the shape of the urban environment, it's the shape of the environment as a whole. This image, I will probably use it also the next week for our class on the Anthropocene, because these are also metaphors of the Anthropocene, right? So the Anthropocene is that geological era in which the footprint of humankind on the planet itself, it's visible. Well, what is more visible than this? The rural landscape actually completely reshaped by this intensive agro-industrial system that is dominating the scene nowadays. But also this, right? This is just an image that we could use for the Anthropocene, right? In the last 50 years, a staggering 140 million hectares, the size of almost all India's farmland, have been taken over by 4 industrial crops. So 4 industrial crops are actually completely monopolizing the space for agricultural production. That are soybean, oil palm, rapeseed, and sugarcane. And of course, these are the 4 main industrial crops that are used in our everyday food, in our everyday industrialized food nowadays. This is what John Tucker writes in this book that I really recommend that you read, that is called How to Thrive in the Next Economy. That has a very interesting chapter on sustainable food systems. And this is the idea, also very interesting, of food miles. The food miles are basically the miles that any food item has to travel to get to our table, basically. And of course, in the case of Caroline Steele, she focuses on the case of England once more. You say, well, you see, most food entering the UK will make several more trips before it ends up at its final destination. A recent report by DEFRA reckoned that British food transport accounted for 30 billion, I'm sorry, which is much more striking, 30 billion vehicle kilometers in 2002. That is 10 times further than a decade earlier, and the equivalent, look at this figure, the equivalent of circumnavigating the globe 750,000 times. So it's just completely, almost hard to imagine, right? As a figure in itself. And well, this is the amount that food travel to get to our places, and she's talking about only the UK. So you understand how much fossil fuel is actually used to transport these food items, whether it's salmon from Canada, as you see, or it's fruit from Australia or lamb from New Zealand, right? It doesn't even matter. And well, I found this case some weeks ago of like pears that were sold on the shelves of supermarkets in the US. Pears that were grown in Argentina and then went all the way east or west, actually, to Thailand, and then back again to the US to get sold. So it's this kind of nonsense, this kind of paradox that are actually created by this agribusiness and that dominates nowadays. Joanna Bligman, she's a food journalist in Britain, in the UK, and she created this this expression that I think is very appropriate to define the kind of situation that we all usually come across when we enter a supermarket in our cities. This expression is permanent global summertime, so that we can find a pineapple in the middle of January here in Europe. So there's a permanent global summertime. Actually, I use this picture because I think it's very metaphorical. So how this mirrors amplify the image to the infinite. So what we can find in all the shelves in all the stores of the supermarket that we actually go and buy too. But it's very interesting because this idea of permanent global summertime is based on an idea that John Thakara calls the distributed winter. So how this permanent global summertime is made possible? Well, thanks to a distributed winter. What is a distributed winter? Well, it's every refrigerator that is used to keep this food fresh until they get to the supermarket. And so you see, this is the cold chain logistic infrastructure that, of course, is based on supply, pre-cooling system, manufacturers. Then you have another chain of the cold chain, which is transport with refrigerated trucks, refrigerated railway wagons, refrigerated cargo containers in the airplanes. You have storage. You have a winter that is conceived only for storage, cold storage in warehouses. You have another transport, which is the local transport. Once you have once you have taken your fruits from Argentina to London, then you have to get from London to Manchester, and then you will use a truck to do this. And then you get to the end customers, of course, passing through the supermarkets. So you have like this kind of cold chain that is really, in fact, a distributed winter. Takara writes, the writer Nicola Twilly discovered that the diet of most North Americans and Europeans depends on the existence of a vast distributed winter. A seamless, that is also very interesting, seamless. You know how many times I insisted on this idea of invisibility. This system works because it's invisible, because we don't know it. Because when we go to the supermarket and buy the object, the food item, the commodity, we don't see this. We don't see this happening. We just have to read where this food comes from, and it's also very, very hard to figure out, to track down. As you experimented with the case of the mobile phone and the iPhone that you already studied. So a seamless network of artificially chilled processing plants, distribution center, shipping containers, retail display cabinets that creates the permanent global summertime of our supermarket aisles. So there's a permanent global summertime that is made possible through a distributed winter. This is the nonsense. The main nonsense on which the agribusiness is based on. And of course, it all amounts to the invisibility of the food chain. The food industry, still writes, is a highly secretive operation. We live in ignorance of the 24-hour efforts that keeps our lasagnas coming, and so is the industry just fine. So we don't know this, and we are fine with this because we don't know it. And we don't even want to know it, because we are very shocked when we see a documentary about the cruelties that the food industries make about, for example, on animals, or on pigs, on porks, on whatever kind of animal, on salmons, and we've seen the last week, as you remember, right? So it's all about invisibility. It's always about alienation, as Adam will say, right? The very logic of capitalist system is the logic of alienation, in which you never know how a certain item is produced, how a certain item is transported, who was exploited to do what. In this case, it's not even human, also humans, because of course humans are also exploited in this agribusiness sector, but also animals. And there's a very interesting project by this photographer. He's a British photographer. His name is Peter Menzel. That made a wonderful photographic dossier or reportage back like 10 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, in which only by a picture, well, he asked a family in different parts of the world, he asked the family, well, you know what, just take a picture in front of what you eat in a week. So just buy all the food that you will eat in a week, including everything, also the food for the dog, but ranging from the vegetables to industrialized food, and put it on the table. So I will take a picture of you, like surrounded by the stuff you will be eating in 1 week. And so for example, these images in the UK and in the US that are very similar in terms of their food systems are very striking, because you see that what we will call, of course, like natural food, if there is a food that is natural, what we call natural food is a very small amount of what they eat within a week, as you see. It's basically the majority of it is industrialized food, from Burger King to Pizza Hut to the Mars and the twirls and I mean the chocolates that you see here in the British family. So it's basically a diet completely dominated by this big corporation and the big agribusiness. Agribusiness is once again is made of big supplies, big producers, and big distributors working like hand in hand to destroy our health and our cities and our environments. So this is the kind of image that we are used to, of course, because we were actually born with this image. The majority of us, we're actually born with this image that, like, to buy food is to go through the supermarket aisles with a cart and put something with it, right? This is the idea, the cultural image, the ritual to which we are used to. These are all advertising ads that that came out in the US during the first phase of the economic boom within the 1950s and the 1960s, in which one of the symbols, the actual symbols of the affluent society, of the American way of life, to the idea of comfort, was the fact that your fridge was full of different items of food, and your cart was actually full of this, right? In these images of a woman going back, of course, it's always a woman. It's also an issue of gender. That going back home with all the grocery that she bought in a supermarket. So this idea of affluency, of how do I say, this idea of, most of all, this idea of more than enough, right? That goes hand in hand with this kind of supermarket culture that was born in the 1950s and 60s. Of course, in the US, it was born during the 1950s, and then it came to Europe during like a little bit later. But during the process of what is usually called the process of European Americanization, then actually went global a few decades after. And you have also, she also talks about, she doesn't only talk about the shape of the environment, the shape of the cities, the shape of our territories, but also she talks about eating habits that profoundly change from a certain moment on, which is the 1950s. So you have, for example, this idea of the hamburger and the soft drinks, and also this very, how do I say, they don't look very tasty right now, right? These ones on TV dinners, but they skyrocketed. They had an enormous success in the 1950s because they were very connected to the idea of watching TV. So you had this kind of pre-cooked trays that you would just buy in a supermarket, and you had all according to them, all the necessary to have a proper diet and a proper meal, and you will just slump on your sofa watching TVs and eating this horrible stuff, right? But this was a cultural ritual that was established during the 1950s in a very strong manner. You had, for example, advertising, such as people like sitting in front of the TV and eating those things in family as well. So these are the Swanson TV dinners. You will find plenty of material on the internet about the Swanson TV dinners. Also, of course, to be read in a way that it's gender related, because of course it's always the woman who has to prepare the dinner, even when the woman it's already a career woman that has her own job, right? And well, we get to this paradox. I sent a message once on Facebook to Adam and Alex Giordano. I said, well, you know that what we are thinking of, when we're talking about, we are striving to do, it all comes down to this, to the fact that that there was a news that came out on the Guardian a couple of months ago that say, well, the lab analysis of a Subway tuna sandwich fails to identify tuna DNA. So there's not even tuna in the tuna sandwiches that are made by the Subway. So this is the kind of incredible nonsense that we got to. And of course, as opposed to all this, as opposed to this idea of food regime, of agribusiness, the monopolized agribusiness, you have the idea of distributed food systems that are just probably the way completely opposed, the way of conceiving a food system that is completely opposed to this. And is of course based on the idea of Christopher Alexander. So you have, first of all, this idea that every link in this chain that goes from production to distribution and to waste disposal can actually be linked in a different manner. So from the market you can go directly from the farm you can go directly to the table without passing through the supermarket or the factory, so the manufacturing process. And of course, when we talk about, let's say, sustainable food systems, we talk about everything, something that is already there in the majority of the world, which is not the industrialized world. So you have like veggie markets in India, such as in Iran, such as in Albania, such as in Turkey, such as in southern Italy, and you have this kind of urban environments that of course are also social environments. So there's always a social factor that is profoundly linked to to a certain organization of the food supply, as you see here. You also have it's also an issue and a matter of aesthetics, because an Indian city is a South Asian city or a Latin American city. It's also appealing by the way it smells, because you find smells within a city, because you have street vendors, open restaurants, open bars, you have food produced, actually manufactured and consumed on the street, which is something impossible to find, for example, in the US. Besides the food trucks that you find every once in a while in a corner, you will everything, also because of hygienic, we will say, reasons, is just stuck within a restaurant, stuck within a supermarket, stuck within a commercial center. So the city is not bustling with this kind of images that are very common, as you all know, in other parts of the world. So it's also a matter of not only a visual manner; it's also a matter of taste, of smell, that is much more enriching and much more rich. So I called it the multi-essential city, something that Western city gradually abandoned and actually gradually lost. Even though it's true, for example, that in cities, also in cities in Northern Europe, such as Copenhagen, for example, I was in Copenhagen in August, they are kind of reappearing in neighborhoods that are populated by immigrants, of course. Not the hipster areas of the center, but in the areas that are not even low income, but middle low income areas of the cities. You find some environments that are kind of resembling these images, but also in Naples, of course, at Pigna Seca here, down the building where I am right now. you have this image, but it's not an image that is easy to find, for example, in Los Angeles. It's almost impossible to find it in Los Angeles. Caroline Steele also talks about Piazza Montanara, which probably Beatrice knows about this. Piazza Montanara was a part of the city in Rome that is actually very close to the to where the Campidoglio is. It was at one side of the Campidoglio, and and Piazza Venezia right now. That was destroyed by Mussolini when the fascist regime also built Via dei Fori Imperiali, destroying part of the archaeological site of Rome. This piazza, this place, this square, was very important for the traditional Rome, because this square was where all the peasants, all the farmers from the outskirts of Rome will go every Sunday to sell their food. So there was this kind of very lively urban market that was bustling, as you see, with urban energy, with a very lively atmosphere. And we might say that there is something similar to what there is in close to this area in Mercato della Coldiretti, but it's not the same, of course. I mean, this place was very popular, was very open to any kind of class, of social class, and you will find like natural food coming from the outskirts of Rome or the immediate surroundings of the city, something which you don't find anymore besides how do I say, Coldiretti market. And so Steele picks up on something that Jane Jacobs would say, right? Say, well, the city has to be chaotic, at least to a certain extent. There's a necessary chaos in the city, which is a form of order. It appears like a chaos, but it's a form of order on which the city is based, actually. So for example, she said the word agora comes from the Greek verb agero, which means to gather, and agorazein meant variously to frequent the agora, to buy in the marketplace, or best of all, to haunt the agora. As its lexical complexity suggests, the agora was much more than a food market. It was a secret precinct, a law court, a social space, as well as the seat of the Athenian democracy. So there's a link, a direct link, as you see always. We are always talking about, in this course, as you see, we are always constantly talking about the entanglement of natural, technological, and social systems. You see that the market is not only a place where you sell and when you buy food. It's also a place of democracy. It's also a place of social gathering, a place that makes possible the birth of, for example, social movements. And the more scattered people are, the less it's probable that they will be able to gather and to organize a certain political movement as well. So there's a direct link between society, politics, and the way a certain city is actually spatially distributed in a certain sense. And also there's a quote that is included in the book by Caroline Steele. Say, well, Eubulus in the 4th century before Christ wrote, everything will be for sale together in the same place at Athens. You got figs, you got summoners, you got bunches of grapes, turnings, pears, apples, witnesses, rolls, medlars, haggis, honeycombs, chickpeas, low suets, bee sting spotting, myrtle berries, allotment machines, irises, lamps, water clocks, loose indictments. So this idea that the agora is where the market takes place, but also where politics, where law takes place, that is very important. And it's all about this idea of overlapping, of function overlapping that make a traditionally city work. And of course, the rural landscape, we could talk about the rural landscape. If the rural landscape of the traditional agribusiness of the, we will see that it's basically an image that is a metaphor of the Anthropocene. Well, a rural landscape in a sustainable food system is just like this, which is something a little bit different. I don't know if you agree. In terms of food culture, say, well, besides and apart the flows that are still present, for example, in Italy, Italy is an environment in which a certain kind of food culture is still in place. And so you see, for example, much more natural items on the table of this Italian family comparing to the US and the UK ones. And also in Egypt, of course, in Egypt even more, you got the presence of much more vegetables in a diet. And of course, don't only focus on don't focus only on the food items, so what is actually spread on the table, but also on the amount of people that makes up the family. So you see, for example, how many Egyptians are relying on this amount of food per week, comparing, for example, to the Americans. But still, for example, you see both in Egypt and in Italy the presence of soft drinks that, of course, are one of the proofs of their permeability to the industrialized system that come from the US. And also, of course, the eating habits are completely different. If you have the Swanson TV dinners of people eating while watching the TV, or people eating Big Mac menu within a car because they are stuck in the car, in the traffic jam. You have different eating habits in other parts of the world, such as the much more convivial, much more social eating habits of India, of certain parts of Africa, of certain parts of Latin America, for example, and of course of certain parts of Italy as well. And so, based on this striking difference that, of course, are different that manifest themselves in many different fields, as you see, not only in the shape of the cities, but also in the shapes of the surroundings, in the food culture that is connected to this, in the social arrangement, in the social distribution that are made possible through different food systems. Well, Carolyn Steele writes this book that came out actually last year in the midst of the pandemic. Actually, it was titled Citopia, and it was a kind of we will say update of Angry City, but in a much more positive, in the sense that proactive manner. To say, well, you know, probably it's not possible to have a completely self-sufficient city when we are referring to megalopolis such as Tokyo or Shanghai or whatever. But it's actually at least possible to make them more self-sufficient than they were. So to give them more resilience, both in terms of production and in terms of food options for the people that live in it. And she invents this neologism, this term that it's Citopia, that it's actually made of two Greek words, which Citos in Greek means food, and topos, which is a place. It's not a utopia, but it's a Citopia. It's a place based on a different kind, a sustainable kind of food system. And so, for example, she proposed this kind of also schemes in which you see a city made of dotted and spotted with I'm gonna say urban gardens, community-led gardens, vertical farms, based on, for example, also both more traditional and more conventional ways of growing food, such as, for example, the community gardens, but also more innovative and more high-tech forms of food production, such as, for example, aquaponics or hydroponics, on which the vertical farms are based. But a city that is much more able of producing its own food. Also, for example, as you see here, using the terraces and the rooftops of buildings. Why don't we use the rooftop of buildings as urban gardens, for example, or community gardens to grow food, to grow our own food? As you see here, for example. So how would a city look if it was conceived like this? If it was conceived as a new kind of urban environment in which food production gets enmeshed, gets intertwined with other forms of activities, with other forms of with other urban function. So how we can cover the city with activities that are related to food production to make the city more sustainable and also more resilient in terms of their of its own food supplies, as we see. So we have the urban community farming, as I say, that it's a phenomenon that was born actually in the US at first, and then it became pretty famous also in Europe and now in Asia. You have the idea of vertical farm that was first proposed and launched and also implemented by this scholar whose name is Dixon Despomier, that wrote this book that is called The Vertical Farm, Feeding the World in the 21st Century, the Vertical Farm. So, of course, as I said, it's based on innovative technologies such as aquaponics or hydroponics. For example, Alfonso Morone has been dedicating some studies on the system on which the vertical farms are based, and it's all about the idea of, for example, using adaptive reuse of existing buildings that are basically almost on the brink of crumbling down, and to convert them into productive powerhouses for food, such as, for example, as Federica and her colleagues made in Palazzo Fuga for the project of last year. But for example, there was also a group, probably I also already mentioned, that used the churches in Naples that are on the brink of falling down. They converted it into vertical farms. Of course, it's almost a speculative idea. It's not something that is very feasible because of also of the laws that protect the heritage and all this stuff. But still, I think it's a powerful way of reimagining our cities and to even to give new life to buildings that are pretty often to buildings that are protected in a very traditional way, because there's also a traditional image of protection, which is, well, just leave it the way it was, just do not touch it. Why, if we conceive the idea itself of preservation of heritage as a way of giving new life to this heritage, to adapt this heritage to new necessities that are necessities entrenched within the Anthropocene, such as these ones, right? And so you have this bunch of words, this bunch of keywords that I just put here that are very, how do I say, very much connected to this imaginary of sustainable food systems. So you have all these keywords that are actually interconnected with each other. such as urban and community gardens, food sovereignty, we already talked about, the idea of supporting small producers, the local food production, the rural-urban linkage, which I mentioned at the beginning. So the idea that the more connected the city to its surrounding is, the better it is in terms of its resilience. So, for example, the idea of zero kilometer, that it's very kilometer zero in Italy, that is very much spread nowadays, but also territoriality in terms of valorization of local production, improving the supply chain, also creating a new different kind of tourism that it's linked to this idea of supporting new forms of food production, such as, for example, the forms of tourism that are supported by slow food that you guys are studying. But also on the left side, you see in the realm of distribution, you have cooperatives, for example, that are concerned with both retail and market, the canteens and the public kitchens that are also a social element of cohesion, that are, of course, completely opposite to the idea of big restaurants and big supply chains. The circular economy, you see here, the idea of, for example, using the food waste for composting for another food activity. What is related to consumption, to consumers in general, to a better health of the consumers, of the population in general, but also the community engagement, to also the examples that we've seen when we talked about the examples made by Ezio Manzini, as you remember, Coltivando in Milan, for example, of Feeding Milan, seasonal products, organic consumption, food education, food justice. So you see how much, how big the landscape of sustainable food system is potentially. It's even bigger than this, actually, because it also involves terms of issues of ecology, issues of redesigning our diets, for example, but much more than this. For example, Julie Brown, that she wrote in this association that is called growingcommunities.org. She made this complicated, but not that much, scheme that she calls the food zones, in which you see, just in a nutshell, the more is a city or an urban environment reliant on its immediate surroundings, the better it is. So you have this figure of 80% self-sufficiency and 20% imports. So it's not just about eliminating the imports, but reducing to a reasonable amount of 20% in terms of the entire food supply, food necessities of a city. So you will be able to go through this in the website as well. But still, it's a model. It's a framework that allows you to understand the benefits that a certain kind of food production, sustainable food production, might have. And then, of course, you have the idea of continuous productive urban landscapes that was first put forward by these two scholars in the UK, Bon and Bill Joel. That is very interesting because they actually talk about this idea that is very close to, well, it's not very close. It's actually a reinterpretation of the idea of the garden cities by Howard, but in a much more contemporary way, in which they envision these kind of green corridors that cross, actually, they run all across the cities, and there are links in which you have urban gardens, community-led gardens, vertical farms, all connected to each other in this kind of green corridors that are able to revitalize, give new life to big urban environments. environments in general. So as Takara says, the way complex systems change is a quietly unfolding transformation. A variety of small changes, interventions, and disruptions accumulate across time until the system reaches a tipping point. Sustainability then is not something to be engineered or demanded from politicians. It's a condition that emerges through incremental change at different scales. So you see, the idea that we've always insisted upon, the idea that is not about, a totalizing transformation from scratch of the way our city works, but it's a matter of hacking some of its inner dispositives, devices in which it works. Something that you have to push some buttons, and then all of a sudden a transformation which is much bigger in scale will come about. It's not just envisioning in the way the modern architects did a completely different city. It's just how do we how can we tinker with the city? Tinker with is mean to hack the city in a very specific manner, in a very specific place to prompt a transformation that will reach a much larger scale in time. And so it's about the thing that we've just said in our course up to now. And it's what I actually would expect from your proposals in the hackathon. So to understand how as a food system could be redesigned, but not from scratch, but from the existing city, through the adaptive reuse of buildings, to the reuse and the occupation of void spaces, for example, of spaces that are just left unused right now, through the set in motion of, for example, of local markets, of different ways of connecting producers and consumers. These are the ways in which probably a very effective transformation could take place within our environments. I think, yeah, I will just leave it here because it's already 20 to 2, and there will be another final part, but I will just leave it for the next time because otherwise it's too much, I think. And I would also like to understand if you have doubts or whatever concerning this. But I will also talk about permaculture in the next sessions, probably also starting from next Monday. But the purpose was to give you an overall framework through which you can look at the city in other ways, and most of all, to give you some tools to understand how big is the impact of food system on the cities where we are inhabiting right now. So I don't know if you guys have any questions or also remarks and consideration to share with us. I think it's fine. We can also stop the recording, right? Oh. Okay.